everybody. This is Natasha Helfer, and I am thrilled to be back on Mormon Sex Info. It's been a minute since I've had a podcast, so bear with me. You know, life sometimes gets crazy, but I am super, super excited to have my guest today. My guest is Dee Hartmann. She is one of the authors of the book called The Pleasure Prescription. She is a pelvic floor therapist, and she is going to be talking to us today about the importance of pleasure in regards to helping with really all kinds of things, but also this issue of genital pain, which is actually so common for female bodies to experience. And before we get totally into the interview, I just want to give a shout out to the podcast. Make sure you understand that this podcast does rely on your donations. So if anybody wants to throw a few dollars this way in regards to helping us keep this podcast alive and well, we always appreciate that. And you can do that through the donor boxes at mormonsex.info. So that's the website. But other than that, we just kind of want to get started with the podcast itself. So Dee, I met you at the latest Ishwish conference, which is a conference for all kinds of medical and mental health professionals who are interested in female sexual health. And you were there kind of, you know, with your book and kind of advertising also with Lioness, which is this amazing vibrator that it's kind of like a smart vibrator, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would
That's what we refer to it as, a smart vibrator.
A smart vibrator, which you can track your orgasms and kind of get to know what your orgasm cycle and styles are like. But I'll have you talk all about that. But before we get started, why don't you spend a little bit of time introducing yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here.
Oh, I'm thrilled.
it's always fun for me to talk about my passion, and that's certainly where I am now. I'm a women's health physical therapist. Had a private practice in the Chicago metro area for just over 27 years, where I really specialized on the treatment of women with chronic abdominal, pelvic, and vulvar pain and sexual dysfunction. It was a tremendous, tremendous place to be. I was honored that women came through my door with the greatest of humility to offer and discuss with me the most intimate parts of their lives. It was an amazing journey. I closed my practice in 2017, and my husband says that was supposed to be my retirement, but that didn't quite work out that way, because a colleague called and said, we need to prove a few things before you give up. And that's kind of where I have been since, with the pleasure prescription being one of those things. We have a for-profit, which is Vulva, and a not-for-profit, which is a Center for Genital Health and Education, which is working on basic science research in sexual health in the bedroom rather than in the exam room. So doing all sorts of fun, wonderful things, including getting the opportunity to chat with you. So thank you.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So yeah, why don't you tell me a little bit, and the audience a little bit, about how this book came about, and especially maybe your partnership with your co-author.
Yes.
Yeah, because I know one of the fun things that you talk about is like you're the pain part of the book, and your co-authors like the pleasure part of the book. That's kind of funny, but anyway.
Yes. We actually met from a very short stint at a sexual dysfunctions clinic in Chicago, when she was in Chicago, when I was in the Chicago metro area. So she was there. Interestingly, we had both had the same sexual health mentor with Dr. Demina Renshaw at Loyola University, but we got to this clinic. It was, again, very short-lived, but the real reason we were brought there and attracted there was to meet each other. She went off and did her thing. I stayed in my practice in the area. She found, as a social worker, that working in the traditional medical model wasn't quite where she wanted to be. So she went off and got a number of certifications in alternative and as we kind of say, on the fringe kinds of things, from tantra to erotic blueprint, to a number of different sexual approaches outside of the medical model.
Mm-hmm.
We communicated back and forth over the years, because she also became a somatic sex educator, sexological body worker, where she can work with her hands with women. I would contact her, I have this patient that I'm really having trouble with. What do you think? And she would do the same with me. And over those years, I found what amazing results she was able to get using the tools that she had in her toolbox. And she the same with me. So when I did retire and she asked me to prove a few things. And I said, yeah, okay. The book was really the first on our list. And it really is a passionate kind of rendering of her life's work and my life's work. And again, we are like two sides of the same coin, pleasure and pain. And basically the way I like to put it is, if you flip that coin and pain comes to the top, pleasure is usually pushed down, and we see the pain and we perceive pain. However, if you flip that coin again and pleasure winds up on top, we see pleasure, we perceive pleasure, and the pain is pushed down. So we know that pleasure heals. We know that's the case. I think that I, in the Western medical world, have had really good results with getting rid of chronic vulvar pain, or vulvodynia or vestibulodynia. And typically what we do is we say, okay, we've done our job. The pain is gone. Now go do your thing. And didn't really stop to realize that we were really falling short of full recovery. And that's where our pleasure piece really comes in, and why it's so important to me now to be talking about the continuation of the Western medical model into self-function more than anything, is being able to be the people we are and have the pleasure that we should be having in our lives.
Well, and this is so interesting because right off the bat in your book, you both speak about kind of this war on pleasure, right? And it's interesting in kind of in Mormonism and Mormon doctrine. It's interesting because one of our doctrinal foundations is that we're actually here on earth to experience pleasure. And there's kind of scripture in the Book of Mormon that says that man, woman is that they may have joy. And so we have some pleasure centric kind of doctrine in our, kind of in our purview. And at the same time, I don't see that very much like within our practice, right? Like within our culture, because I think we're also permeated by American culture and also by Christian culture. And,
Sure.
And I think that there is a lot of messaging that pleasure in a lot of ways is to be distrusted, or it's hedonistic, or it's lazy, right? We're a very productive culture, like we're, very high work ethic, and that's true in Mormonism too. And so it's like, if you're not busy doing something, if you're not busy being productive, if you're getting more than 6 hours of sleep a night, you're kind of considered lazy or not getting enough done, right? So pleasure is not something that I see people very comfortable with when they come through my office. Is that kind of your experience as
Yes,
well?
and I wish, I don't wish I could. I almost said I wish I could say it was only in your culture, which it would really not a good thing to say. But I think it's pervasive throughout all culture. Because there's work in the literature that when you ask people what they find pleasurable, they don't understand what pleasure means.
Mm.
The word pleasure has been hijacked to mean sexual pleasure.
Mm.
And if we're not going to talk about sexual pleasure, and we know we don't want to talk about sex, so we don't talk, not just in your culture, but in across the cultures, that if we don't want to talk about sexual pleasure, then we don't have pleasure. Pleasure is a funny kind of thing. We really have to take pleasure for ourselves. It's a gift that we give ourselves. But if we don't take the time to do it, to appreciate what's going on in our lives that brings us joy and brings us pleasure, we can go through life without it and never miss it because we don't know what it is or how to get it. That's kind of convoluted, but I think you understand what I'm saying, that it's something that we have to really aspire to see, to get, to find. It's free. It never wears out and it never runs out, but we just don't, it's not important to us.
Right. And that's another thing, is that sometimes it can be seen as selfish, right? To be able to take that time, or to to be a taker.
Take, isn't that
right?
something? Take for
Mhm.
ourselves. We can't, it's no
Mhm.
longer acceptable to take for ourselves, because we truly are. It's so crazy how busy everyone has gotten. And even with this crazy pandemic, I think we get to work from home. I don't know about you. I have working kids, and they were astounded at how much more they worked when they were working from home, because you're always on.
You're always on, right?
You're always on. So their time for really finding that pleasure was even limited more by
Right.
working at home.
Right.
And I think this is something that's going to stay, this work from home stuff, but I think it really, we need to get a balance.
Right. Okay. So the next kind of themes that I noticed in your book is one, the drastic non-education, right, that people have about their own bodies, especially female bodies, and then partnered with kind of like this medical model that you're noticing where the emphasis is on dysfunction. Right. So if a person goes in and visits their doctor and says, "Hey, I'm having genital pain," then the emphasis goes on, well, how do we give you a cure to this pain and figure out dysfunction, which means that a lot of the research and a lot of the studies and a lot of the monies are going towards understanding female dysfunction and
Right.
not so much female function, right? And how our bodies
Yeah.
actually function well. And I think what you're trying to get at in a lot of the book is how just our normal pleasure and our capacity for pleasure, our tremendous capacity for lots of sensation and sensuality has in of itself a lot of healing power. So that's a big overview. I know I just said a lot of things, but where does that take you in regards to where you want to go next?
Well, you really struck a chord because when it comes to and I will make reference to female in reference to someone who was born with a uterus in ovaries and a vagina. We know about this much about that female sexual function. Again, we know when it doesn't work and we're broken, we're wrong, we're bad, and we are dysfunctional. We know all about the dysfunction, but we don't know, and we try to figure out ways to treat it, but we don't know what's normal or average or given in the first place. And until we find that, and what we do know that's in the literature is that we have looked at female arousal as women laying on a table in a research lab with cords in and out of their vagina, measuring their temperature and their mucus production, watching pornography. And that's how we've gauged and measured and defined female arousal. We don't really talk about desire. I don't know. Who knows what desire is? We don't really chat about that. We do know that there's physiological desire and psychological desire. There's both, just as like there's physiological and psychological arousal. But I think from our perspective, it's that desire piece that's really missing. Because if you really don't know what full arousal and full pleasure feels like, it's pretty hard to get excited about doing it. Right? Why do you want to do something that you really don't know anything about? So that really is the big piece of what we're trying to help women understand. It's not that you're wrong. It's not that you're broken. It's not that you're dysfunctional. It's that we, and I mean we as females across the world, don't have a good sense of what desire means and what full arousal means. So that's really where we're trying to spend our time. And in our non-traditional, non-academic based research platform, we're really trying to reframe the conversation around female sexual desire, arousal, pain, and pleasure, because we don't have that basic research. And, that's where we're working on that side to try to just get it done in the bedroom, out of the lab and in the bedroom, to find out what's really happening and how we can help other people understand and appreciate their own bodies.
Yes.
I think that's what it's all about.
So can you give a basic overview? And I've had programs on genital pain before, as far as vaginismus and explaining vulvodynia and dyspareunia and some of these words, but maybe give an overall understanding from your perspective about what are some of the main ways that genital pain shows up, and maybe some of the basic reasons as to why that may be the case. Yeah, and maybe some of the statistics that you're aware of.
Sure. Pain can come in any number of ways and for any number of reasons. There's all sorts of research suggesting why and how it happens. It can just happen the first time we try to touch our vulva, if it's to try to insert a tampon, if it's to put a finger in, if it's to use a sex toy, if it's for a physician's exam, or to even have heterosexual sexual contact. If there's any type of pain and discomfort that stays, that's unusual, that's abnormal. the first time, should there be, is there going to be a little bit of pain, perhaps with the first sexual encounter? Perhaps that's the case, but it shouldn't be something that's sustained and that's ongoing and that really has pain, creates pain, sustained pain that happens after the incident happens. What happens, and we don't always know what happens. I mean, it can, as I said, it can be that primary problem that happens when we first try to have something go into our vagina, or you could be perfectly fine and have had a child or two and sex has been wonderful, and all of a sudden you start developing pain. That could be a problem. You can have pain in and around the childbearing year. That can be a problem. So that's something that we have to deal with and be aware of and appreciate. And once we go through our lives and get into the menopausal phase, it's very common for women in menopause to have pain. So pain comes in all shapes and sizes. We're just trying to address all of them and create an awareness. I mean, I think that's the most important piece with the book, is really just to create awareness that, again, we're not bad, we're not broken, we're not dysfunctional. We just need to understand our own bodies and what's happening.
So I think at the beginning of the book, you really start with, I mean, it's interesting because the whole book is set up into several chapters. And it's also at the end of each chapter, there's some prescriptions that you offer, some exercises, which are really lovely. And they kind of cover different things from physical exercises to psychological exercises, journaling that you can do, different things that you can be exploring about yourself. And I think throughout the whole premise of most of the book, I mean, the last part of the book is there's some partnered exercises, but the primary bulk of the book is really getting to know yourself.
Yes.
So I know that you have some models and some things, and are you comfortable just sharing maybe a little bit of just anatomical information that you feel like is not that people are not as aware of usually?
Sure.
That can be helpful in regards to understanding both pleasure and maybe even some reasons why there might be some pain.
Right. So from a physical therapy perspective, this is where I spent my life. This is the pelvis.
And by the way, for those of you who are listening to this, it might be useful for this part to go to either the Facebook Live or to the YouTube video to see the
pelvis. The pelvis. It sits at the base of the spine. The vertebrae stack one on top of the other. If you look at it from the back, the vertebrae come down. The last 4 or 5 vertebrae fuse together to form the sacrum. The ring of the pelvis comes together at the base of the spine. They form the sacroiliac joints, which a lot of people may have heard of, in particular if they've had pregnancies or low back pain. There's also a joint in the front called the pubic symphysis. The head of your hip bone comes in here and attaches here, the ball of the hip joint on either side. If we flip you over and lay you on your back, these are those infamous Kegel muscles, however you want to refer to them. In our world, we refer to them as the pelvic floor muscles. There are actually 2 layers of muscles. There's an external or superficial pelvic floor and a deep pelvic floor. The superficial pelvic floors, all muscles almost form a triangle of support around the vaginal opening here, with the clitoris at the top, the urethra down inside the labia minora, and the vaginal opening at the bottom. Again, it's almost a triangle of support that extends down into the anus, where it then comes back and attaches to the coccyx or the tailbone. If we take this off, we look at the deep pelvic floor, the muscles are a lot bigger and broader. They start in the front. If I hold this up, you can see it's almost like a sling inside. Doesn't actually quite look this beautiful in real life, but this is kind of how we've talked about in the anatomy books and how we make it, so it works really well. But the muscles go all the way from the front on either side of this pubic symphysis in the front and come back and attach at the tip of the coccyx in the back, so that the function of these muscles is to support the pelvic organs. The bladder sits right behind the pubic symphysis. The uterus is high and behind that, and the rectum comes down and behind that. So the function of these muscles is to support those organs so they don't fall out. They're really ugly when they fall out. They control urination and defecation. This is what contracts and relaxes with orgasm. And this really is the base of our core support. So it's a very important functional group of muscles that we need to have working in our bodies. I'm going to pop this back in so you can get a kind of a sense of the last little bit of anatomy that I'll share with you here, and that is the clitoris. The clitoris sits right at the top of the vagina. We all think that when we have a clitoris, we just think of that little bitty nub that sticks out above the vaginal opening. That's only the beginning of a very large body of structures that come down, and on either side of the vaginal opening is in the middle of this structure. These are the vestibular bulbs. This is the crus or the legs of the clitoris on either side out here. And that's the flying clitoris. The neck of the clitoris comes up and out to the glands of the clitoris, which, although we're not really sure who and where the 8,000 nerve endings came from, it's reported that there are 8,000 nerve endings on the very tip of this clitoral glands, way more than on the entire penis as a whole. There are a lot of people who like to say that the clitoris is the male penis. I kind of have a different opinion on that, because the clitoris is one of the clitoris's sole functions is for our pleasure. But we also know that when we're fully aroused and when we use clitoral stimulation to get to that full arousal, we have the vaginal temperature increases, we have increased mucus production, the pH changes in the vagina, the ballooning of the vaginal vault occurs. So there's a lot that happens if we can figure out how to make this lovely little structure work for us.
Yeah, and it's not so little after all.
It's not so little after all. No, and as it like the penis, there's no urine that comes through the head of the clitoris like in the penis, but it becomes erect just like the penis. It becomes filled with blood. It becomes sensitive. The entire clitoris, not just the glands, but the legs of the clitoris and the clitoral bulbs become sensitized when they get filled with blood. They swell and they become lovely, lovely sensation producers, pleasure producers.
And those are flanking the vaginal cavity, which of course, if you're using either a sex toy or you're having penetration from a penis or, manual stimulation, obviously that's those
exactly
clitoral legs are picking up on all of that sensation.
The vestibular bulbs are right there. Now, there's this myth in I think it's that male population, those penis owners, who think that if they stay in there long enough, they're going to make orgasm happen with penetration. And what is it, 20 to 30%? We don't really know how many women actually have orgasm. It's so hard to get the data because people have a tendency not to tell the truth or not to know, or do we really know? If you're fully aroused, as you're suggesting, and these vestibular bulbs get so full, they do put a little bit of pressure on the vaginal walls. They can increase sensation to an erect penis. They can also be stimulated by an erect penis, which can also help then with orgasm with intercourse. But we have to get to that full arousal, which can take as long as 40 minutes. We know that from literature. So it's a really important piece of anatomy that, quite frankly, wasn't in the literature until 1997.
Which is amazing, right?
Which
and we
is
didn't even
really,
have,
really amazing.
I mean, that 3D structure that you're holding, I don't think we even had that until 2000 and something. So
yeah. Oh, yeah. And I mean, and we now have MRI studies. We're now starting to look more at what erect clitorises look like compared to flaccid clitorises. And so it's really quite exciting.
Yes, that is very exciting. And your argument in the book is that oftentimes penetration of the vaginal cavity is happening way before a female body is fully aroused.
Right. Exactly right. And I know this is very contrary, and I think somebody really got mad when I said it once in giving a talk. I think Rosemary Besson has dealt women a bit of a blow, vagina owners a bit of a blow, because Masters and Johnson's has the direct 1, 2, 3, that linear approach to sexual function, desire, arousal, climax, recovery. And Rosemary Besson has suggested a circular model for women, which, well, we know women are very different from men, and that we come into that intimacy for a number of different purposes, from being close, snuggling, chatting, laying naked next to each other. But orgasm doesn't have to be the reason we come here. And I feel like that's kind of given women say, well, I can just get in bed and snuggle and hug and that will be fine. I really don't need to even work to get to that orgasmic state. And I think that we're just giving up on something that is one of the most amazing gifts that we have in our bodies, and that's reaching that full arousal and that full potential to experience what that's like.
Right, which can happen both from a partnered perspective or a solo perspective, which is, I know, an area that we'll get to in a minute. And I know it's an area that's sensitive, especially for the audience that I speak to, because not always is self-pleasuring something that falls in people's religious values. At the same time, what's so interesting in the science of this, and why it's interesting, because in my Mormon population, we really value education, we really value science, we really value so many of these things about learning, and at the same time, of course, we value our standards, right, in our our behavioral standards. So there's kind of this tension. And I'm inviting people to kind of sit with that tension, because we do know through the education that if females, and you talk about this quite a bit in your book, explaining that if a female body understands her body, if she understands how to reach full arousal, if she understands not only her anatomy, but her psychology of arousal and of pleasure, then the capacity for orgasm, the capacity for even partnered sexual pleasure is exponentially larger, which I think is very much a goal in Mormon marriages and most relational marriages or relational partnerships, right? But before we go there, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about the vulva, because you talked a lot about body image and how there's some really interesting issues with females considering their vulvas not correct, not looking the right way, specifically because of like textbook models that we've been shown about what a vulva looks like versus the reality of the diversity of what actual vulvas look like.
Yes, there is no normal vulva. And vulva meaning the vulva is this whole area. This is muscle, but the vulva is really this whole area between the pubic symphysis. These are the ischial bones, the ischial tuberosities, and this is the perineal body. This is the entire vulva. Okay, the labia majora, or the big lips, are there. The labia minora, the little lips, are there on the inside. The clitoris is here, and this is all considered the vulva. They're not only are they different person to person, the labia are so often different right to left. They're no different from right hand being bigger or smaller than left hand, ears, eyes, feet. They're
Breast.
all chest, right, testicles, let's be clear, they hang different too. God forbid we would ever think, oh, geez, we need to raise that testicle because it's a little bit lower than the other one, which is unfortunately where some women get to. They become very self-conscious. Their body image is so poor about their vulvas that they request a surgical repair. They can go in for what's referred to as labiaplasty, which still is one of the most requested plastic surgeries around the world. And it's where they literally go in and clip the skin of the labia minora and make it smaller and make it neat and tidy, which is, we know that both labia are very important parts of the clitoral network and the arousal network. So as we cut that off, we're actually decreasing our ability to reach that full arousal. It's seen in pictures, it's seen in books that the neat and tidy is better. And interestingly, the research suggests that it's not typically the partners who complain about the vulvas, it's the women themselves, which is a genital self-image problem. We even have a genital self-image scale that we can use for women to ask them about how they feel about their own genitals. They're all beautiful. The color can be different. The size can be different. The hair bearing can be different. The only thing that we can say about genitals is the diversity, and that's the norm.
Yeah.
The norm is genital diversity.
And that's true of size. It's true of coloration. It's true of like the inner lips being larger than the outer lips. It's true of the outer lips being, hanging fairly low. It's true, and
It's yes, across the board. The hood, the prepuce, the clitoral hood has all sorts of different lengths, if you will. The body of the clitoris may be longer in some women and short in other women. Everybody is we're all different. We're all special. We're all unique, and that's truly the beauty. If we can't figure out what feels good and what pleasure we like, it's really hard for partners to know. And I think that that's all a part of this too, that if women really had a better sense of how to find their own sexual pleasure, maybe they would like themselves a little bit better.
yeah, for sure. So, given what I said a little bit about self pleasure, what are your thoughts? Can you help explain why we as professionals, sexual health professionals might encourage, self pleasure as part of this idea of, first of all, dealing with genital pain, second of all, orgasmic potential, and third of all, just good relational health?
Right. Well, and that all starts with appreciating and understanding pleasure throughout all of your senses, through all five senses, right? Because if our sense, as Elizabeth says, if our sensuality buckets aren't full, it's really hard to get access to our sexuality buckets. So it's really important that we begin to like ourselves and all about ourselves. And in getting there, if you're married or if you have a partner or someone who you are with on a regular basis, we talk about something in the book called 24/7 foreplay, that it's pretty hard if we don't really get along in day-to-day activities, that we're expected to jump in bed and have wild, voracious sex. It's just really hard to make that happen. So it's really important to make sure that you do what you can do to help to be friends with your partner, to like your partner. If you can't even stand your partner's touch, it's pretty hard to think that you're going to be able to get in bed and think that touching you is going to be good. So it's all a piece of the whole, and it's not just in the bedroom. It happens throughout life every single day. Doing what we can with our partner 24/7 before we get in bed to like each other. And once we get in bed, we can help each other improve that pleasure even more.
Yeah, and I really liked the whole component of pleasure, because even if you're not comfortable with self pleasure from this idea of masturbation, there's so many other ways that
Mhm.
this book really encourages this idea of okay, but how are you doing with pleasure just in your day-to-day life,
Right,
even outside of your sexuality? Just
right.
how do you function in your world, in
Yes.
regards to pleasure, whether that's with
Yeah,
your
and
kids,
if you
whether
if you
that's with
if you
your
I'm
go ahead.
sorry, go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, yeah, no, for sure.
If you just think about it, and you kind of started with this, if we stay so focused and busy on everything that we do, we have to get this and this done, and we never stop to smell the roses, if you will, then this is where we stay. If we don't bring that pleasure, I mean, all you have to do is think work and you think pleasure. I mean, it changes your thought processes. But again, we have to just take the time out of being here and focused and letting that in. If we stay here all the time and then we jump in bed again, okay, we got to get this done. We don't have time. We only have 10 minutes. We got to get this done. However we can do it. And for men, for people with penises, that oftentimes works quite well. But for those with vaginas, we all know what quickies are, and we've all had quickies, and quickies are okay when they're needed, but they shouldn't become the norm. It just takes longer for vulvas to get fully aroused, and we just have to appreciate that and not think that we're bad, we're broken because it takes us so long, because we know that it takes so long. Just is the way it is. Just as the way it is.
Right. That it's not like that idea of taking space or time, right? That's
Right.
sometimes, a lot of times
Right.
I work with people that it's hard for them to just take up space,
Yeah,
and
well, it
so
is. It
yeah.
is. And I think you said it beautifully when we just got started. It's just like this is what you do all the time. It's really hard to get out of that. And as vulva owners, if we don't know what arouses us, how are we going to help our partners in that process if we can't figure it out ourselves.
So I mean, there are many LDS women who are actually comfortable with self-pleasure and who don't see that as, problematic with their religious beliefs, and who are coupled, and as couples, they've decided this is an okay part of their sexual life to have self-pleasure incorporated. So for those women, what are your thoughts as to just kind of helping them understand why this is such an important part of their sexuality?
Well, I think I just kind of touched on it. They have to know what feels good to them and work on it. We have the whole chapter on sexuality in the book that talks about with the prescriptions of how to begin, how to get there, which you can do fully clothed. I mean, this isn't all X-rated kind of stuff, but how you can reacquaint yourself with the parts of your body. And it doesn't necessarily have to be your genitals. It may just be touch over your body. You may like just really soft touch, and in the creases, we're a little more sensitive than we are in other areas. It doesn't have to be your breasts. It could be your head. I love having my hair played with and my neck, or having my face massaged. Maybe it's your feet. Maybe, what turns you on more than anything is having your feet massaged. But it's a two-way street, because it not only do vulva bodies need that full arousal. I think that penis bodies may not even realize how far they can go if, because of their sexual relationship, they don't ever have to, because it's a slam bam, thank you, ma'am, and we're done kind of thing anyway. So that it can become a partnered activity where you're both increasing your arousal, building your arousal states, really filling your entire body with that arousal, then you're both coming out of it just glowing even more so than you might otherwise.
You have an entire section on kind of like what I get super passionate about, which is sexual shame. Can you talk a little bit about how sexual shame interferes with sexual function?
Sexual shame is any kind of shame, whether it's sexual or otherwise, is such a poison in so many different ways. And again, like pain, it comes from so many different avenues. And I've really been taking a deep dive into trauma over the last year, and really kind of using a different lens to look at all of this, because we know that there's a lot of things that happen in the pre-verbal years before we even learn to talk in the household that can impact us for the rest of our lives. That shame could come from what we don't even remember happening at home. When we get these patients, these women in our offices who are filled with shame, who are filled with anxiety, who are filled with fear, we many times have no real clue where that came from. But what we do know is, if we're not able to help them appreciate and understand that shame is something that needs to be shared and talked about and discussed, not kept quiet, kept secret, and festering inside. It's the only way that we can get shame out. Shame literally has to come out in the open. Now, you're a psychologist, you deal with this all the time. It has to come out in the open. We have to be able to admit and find where that shame is. And it doesn't matter where it came from at that point, but to bring it out, to talk about it, to tell those stories. Brene Brown talks beautifully about this, and really share those stories, and have someone who understands, who's empathetic, who listens, who uses that active listening and says, I hear you, I understand, and let's work through this. And it's just key for so much. And I'll suggest that, in the world of trauma, shame is a piece of that. And it's so integrated that we need to really address both of those huge, huge problems as we go along with all of this.
Right. And when you mention trauma, I want to make sure people understand you're not necessarily talking about sexual trauma. I mean, of course, that can contribute to sexual shame, but even just messages we've received, about our bodies, about sex being, something dirty or bad, or many times I don't know that we even remember possibly times when maybe we were guided away from touching our own bodies, when we were maybe 2 or 3 years old, and maybe in fairly, kind of rigid ways.
Right.
So those are all like little t type of
traumas
traumas.
Yeah. People think that, well, I don't have trauma. I wasn't physically or sexually abused, and I'm not in the military, but that's big T trauma. Those little T traumas are all sorts of things, from losing a job to fighting with friends to divorce to having a sick child. I mean, the small T traumas are endless, and they have an impact and they can build up. And I think that it's putting on that different lens and looking at everything as a contributor, as possible contributor to what's actually happening in our bodies. And it's hard, it's difficult, but everybody deserves that ability to be safe in their own bodies, first and foremost, and to be able to find that pleasure and that happiness and that arousal.
Do you want to talk a little bit about orgasm and the lioness vibrator? Because I know you're partnered with them, I believe, correct?
I am partnered with them. This is the research project that we actually reported on for the first time at ISWISH, the meeting where we met. This is a smart vibrator. It's Bluetooth activated, so you pair it with your phone. It has a clitoral vibrator. The rest of it doesn't vibrate, but this goes inside the vagina. There are sensors here that measure what's happening in your pelvic floor muscles. So you can actually see on your phone when it goes in. There's a little temperature gauge here, so it knows when it goes into your vagina, and it's nice and warm and snuggly, and it starts recording what's happening with your pelvic floor muscles. It's really fascinating. We don't have any of this in the literature real time, so we're really, really excited to be bringing this to the forefront. We had women turn on the clitoral stimulator and record their orgasms and send them to us, and I'm going to be reporting on 26 women's orgasms at a meeting in Dublin, looking at how long it takes to reach orgasm, how long orgasms are, the intensity of the height of the orgasm, and what the resting tone looks like coming out the other end by looking at data created by this nifty little machine. When I first heard about it, I did some consulting with a gal who developed it and who knew my daughter. You know how things always happen. And I talked to my daughter and I said, yeah, they want to do this thing that measures your orgasms. Whatever, it seems kind of weird to me. And she looked at me and she said, Mom, do you wear a Fitbit? I said, well, I do. And she said, and what's the first thing you do every day when you wake up? You see how you slept last night. Well, consider the Lioness smart vibrator as the Fitbit for your orgasms, because it allows you to see, and it lets you see that if you didn't have much time, or you were really stressed, or you may have had a couple of glasses of wine or something else, and you can see just exactly what your orgasms are doing. There's also a gyrator, so you can see how much you move. It's just fascinating. It's a nifty little device. It wasn't created as a research tool. It was created as a consumer product, and they've sold over 15,000 of these little bad boys. So we're really excited that they've agreed to let us use them for research, because they're really, really amazing.
That's awesome. And I did an interview with the founders of Lioness several years ago. So for those of you who are Mormon Sex Info listeners, you may remember that or go back and listen to that, because it's really fascinating too.
Yeah. And it's lioness.io is their website. And they just have tons and tons of stuff. This is a brand new model, if you will. This is 2.0.
Yes.
So they continue to update.
So I'm gonna get busy trying to track my own stuff.
It's fascinating. It's interesting to see. Yeah. And we're loving seeing the research.
That's wonderful. Okay. So you're also involved, if I remember right, with vulvalovcom. Is that correct? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Vulva Love is our for-profit, and our website, vulvalovcom, is really all about labiaplasty and normalizing genital diversity. That's kind of where we started and what we started doing. That's basically where the book sales are. The book is there. But we also have the pleasuremovement.com, which is really our passion now in developing pleasure ambassadors around the world. As a physical therapist, we've just finished 2 back-to-back weekends. It seems like months ago, but it was only 2 weeks ago, with physical therapists here at my house, and at a retreat, teaching them all about pleasure, trauma, pleasure, and vulvar pain. So that's really where we're going. And Pleasure Movement talks about those kinds of things, as well as Elizabeth and I do hands-on immersion kinds of things with women who would like our hands-on help as well. So that's on Pleasure Movement also.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to make sure to link to all of those things. And is there
Okay.
anything else I'm missing that you'd want to make sure that we know about?
I can't imagine. You've been wonderful at coming up with all things, which is just great.
Okay.
Just be kind to yourselves. You know what I always like to write in my books is that pleasure's the gift you give yourself. Just be generous, because it just going out and seeing the clear blue sky and listening to the birds and feeling the breeze is pleasure, and it can just improve your mood. It can improve how you feel about things, and it's something that we just have to really take the time to do, because it doesn't just happen.
I couldn't agree more. And as I was reading this book, I mean, I was thrilled, one, because I run a lot of groups, and one is Reclaiming Female Sexuality. And so many of the things I talk in there were very much, like seconded by what I was reading in your book. But as I was reading it, I was like, oh, I don't want people to just pick up this book because they're dealing with genital pain. I really, really, really would recommend this book to really anyone, because I do think, I mean, obviously, if you are dealing with genital pain, we want to help you with that. And I think this could be a very helpful resource. You really do go through some very interesting exercises, like how to use dilators, how to do breathing, how to do self-pleasuring in ways that can really, like you're saying, access that full arousal that you're talking about. You're talking about some really good journaling exercises. So I think that this, again, would be just really, really helpful for anyone who's wanting to get better at that idea of pleasure, of sexual fulfillment. I even think a lot of this would be great for male people to read as well.
Oh, I think so too. And Elizabeth and I did a talk once to a mixed group, and afterwards we had someone come up to us, a male come up to us in tears, and he said, "You need to talk to men more about this, because my wife has pain. I had no idea what was going on until I just listened to your talk." So I think it's really good for men to see too. And about 2/3 of the book is really about women finding themselves. They don't have to have a partner. They don't have to have anybody with them. They don't have to share this with anyone. And the last part is communication, touch, and consent, where we really help you take this further if you would like to add a partner in. We recommend that those parts be read together if that's what you'd like to do. If you decide to share it, this is the book. It is available on Amazon for those who are interested, as well as other alternative booksellers. If you just Google the title, The Pleasure Prescription, and you do have to have the second part, A Surprising Approach for Healing Sexual Pain, to get to the book, because there is another pleasure prescription book out there that is not ours, but it's dark blue, so it's easy to find. Our whole goal is, from the get-go, is if we could just help one or two women, then it's been worthwhile.
Oh, I think you're going to help a lot more than one or two women.
Oh,
so
thank you.
That's wonderful. So yes, I highly recommend this, and I'm so grateful for your time. I know you're busy, and this is a wonderful gift that you're giving us, as your time and your expertise, and we really appreciate you. And for those of you who are listening, please check out Mormon Sex Info if you want to donate, or check out any of the other interviews that we have going. So thank you so much, everybody, for your time. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
We took the long road home, turned minutes into miles, and as the evening traveled on, the sunset bathed your smile. We stopped beneath the desert stars, wrapped in each other's arms. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth. But through every storm we traveled on like lovers do. And if sometimes we fell apart, we always came back home. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth. Some people say love is blind and forever is too long. But I see your eyes in every sunrise. Can't imagine life alone. Let's take the long road on together until we're gone. Want you by my side till the day I die and into the beyond. It's as simple as our love is. That's how I wanna go, all wrapped up in the arms of our extraordinary, it's nothing ordinary love. Ordinary. No, it's extraordinary.